Did you know that Stripes was almost a Cheech and Chong movie before Bill Murray and Harold Ramis marched in to create one of the most memorable military comedies of the 80s? That's just one of the many wild behind-the-scenes facts swirling around this 1981 classic. More than 4 decades later, audiences still flock to Stripes for its raucous humor, quotable lines, and the unforgettable chemistry between its cast of comedic legends. But how did such an offbeat concept become a box office smash? And why does it remain so beloved? We're about to explore 30 surprising, hilarious, and occasionally bizarre facts that shape the making of Stripes. 1. The very first version of the script was pitched for Cheech and Chong. Screenwriter Len Blum initially imagined 2 potheads stumbling into the army, an idea that seemed perfectly suited to Cheech Marine and Tommy Chong's stoner brand. However, Cheech and Chong passed, reportedly because they weren't too keen on a story that would confine them in boot camp, rather than letting them roam free as they typically did. This stroke of fate opened the door for a different comedic duo, Ivan Reitman, who had already proven his knack for corralling ensemble comedy in Animal House, steered the project in a fresh direction, ultimately turning Stripes into the Bill Murray Harold Ramis vehicle we know today. 2. Bill Murray hesitated to sign on. Having just starred in Caddyshack, he worried about repeating the slacker persona that audiences were starting to associate him with. While he enjoyed playing irreverent characters, Murray was wary of being pigeonholed as the go-to lovable troublemaker in every comedic role. However, once Ivan Reitman reassured him that this character, John Winger, would have more depth and that the comedic potential was through the roof, Murray agreed. His deadpan delivery, knack for improvisation, and underlying vulnerability ended up grounding the film's outlandish scenarios and keeping the humor relatable. It would prove a key stepping stone on his path to becoming one of the most iconic comedic actors of the 80s and beyond. 3. Harold Ramis never planned to act in the film. Ramis was already making a name for himself as a writer, having contributed to Animal House and Meatballs. When Stripes started to take shape, the role of Russell Ziske wasn't intended for him, but Ivan Reitman insisted that Ramis, who had comedic timing honed from his days at the Second City, would be perfect on screen alongside Murray. Reluctantly, Ramis agreed. It was his first major acting gig in a feature film, and though he occasionally felt out of his comfort zone, his understated style played beautifully opposite Murray's more manic energy. The unexpected pairing would become a comedic gold standard, paving the way for their future collaborations, including Ghostbusters. 4. Ivan Reitman envisioned a kind of Animal House joins the army. After the runaway success of that college-themed romp, Reitman saw the chance to transport similar irreverence into a military setting. He knew that tapping into the rebellious spirit of young adults, many of whom felt cynical about authority in the late 70s and early 80s, could make the film feel relevant. Balancing that edginess with enough heart to keep audiences invested was the central challenge. The director's background with ensemble comedy helped him orchestrate all the moving parts, making sure each comedic voice had space to shine. Stripes would go on to prove that a ragtag cast could still win big with moviegoers, so long as it tapped into a shared cultural mood. 5. The actual U.S. Army was far from enthusiastic. Army representatives feared that Stripes might turn basic training into a cartoonish farce, diminishing the seriousness of military service. Despite these concerns, Reitman secured permission to shoot on location at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Once filming got underway, soldiers stationed there were curious and excited to see Bill Murray and Harold Ramis wandering around the base. Some were even recruited as extras, while others just enjoyed the spectacle of big-time movie cameras rolling in their usual stomping grounds. The Army's initial worries subsided once they saw that behind all the jokes, the filmmakers weren't aiming to trash the concept of service, but rather to lampoon the universal absurdities that arise whenever a strict hierarchy meets a bunch of free spirits. 6. John Candy's casting was practically serendipitous. Having appeared in smaller roles and comedic ensembles, he was on the cusp of bigger recognition. Ivan Reitman liked Candy's warm, naturally funny presence, but hadn't yet seen him tackle a major film role. The character of Dewey Oxburger offered a perfect fit, a sweet, slightly naive recruit whose physical stature and eagerness to please create comedic contrast. Candy was nervous about playing such a central part, but he turned that tension into an endearing awkwardness on screen. His big grin and earnest portrayal made Ox an audience favorite, showcasing Candy's knack for broad comedy laced with a lovable underdog spirit. 7. The mud wrestling scene wasn't in the script at first. During rehearsals, John Candy's knack for physical comedy and his willingness to get goofy impressed the production team enough that they brainstormed a set piece that would highlight his comedic range. It ended up being one of the film's most infamous moments. Ox stepping into a mud wrestling ring, much to the astonishment and amusement of audiences. Candy was initially apprehensive about getting down and dirty in front of a camera crew, but once the scene was set, he dove into it with full commitment. The result was comedic gold that also cemented Ox's status as a lovable big lug who's game for just about anything. 8. Kentucky weather kept the crew on their toes. While filming at Fort Knox, they encountered everything from blistering heat to sudden torrential rains, sometimes on the same day. Continuity headaches ensued because a scene that began in sunshine could be forced into a hasty reshoot once the skies darkened. Cast members recall racing to finish certain outdoor shots before the next weather shift. In some behind-the-scenes anecdotes, Bill Murray joked that the production was battling Mother Nature on top of the usual hurdles, deadlines, budget constraints, and comedic timing. Despite the challenges, the unpredictable climate added a sense of realism to the outdoor boot camp environment. 9. Warren Oates brought dramatic gravitas to Sergeant Hulka. Known for tough guy roles in westerns and gritty flicks, Oates was used to intense, serious sets where improvisation was minimal. Meanwhile, Bill Murray and Harold Ramis thrived on comedic spontaneity. This disparity created real tension, but it also enhanced their on-screen dynamic. Oates' frustration at times was genuine, and you can sense that friction when Sergeant Hulka orders the new recruits around. Ivan Reitman later pointed out that the contrast between Oates' stoicism and Murray's irreverent jokes gave Stripes an extra layer of authenticity. Sergeant Hulka became a believable antagonist, firm but not heartless, because Oates wasn't treating it like a comedy, he was treating it like a real army movie. 10. The "I'm your new big toe" line emerged during an off-camera clash between Murray and Oates. Their different approaches collided one day, leading to heated words that didn't break into a full argument, but certainly raised eyebrows. Rather than try to quell the tension, Reitman harnessed it, adjusting certain lines to exploit the sparks between them. Murray knew how to push Oates' buttons just enough to fuel the scenes, while Oates channeled his irritation into the sergeant's commanding presence. The film thus gained an undercurrent of realism. Behind the comedic banter, Sergeant Hulka and John Winger genuinely rub each other the wrong way, which keeps the comedic stakes interesting. 11. Improvisation was king. Bill Murray, famous for his off-the-cuff comedic style, took every opportunity to riff on dialogue. The writers provided a framework, but many of Murray's best lines came about in the moment. "That's the fact, Jack," was initially penned as something else entirely. During a take, Murray substituted his own spin, and the energy it sparked was palpable. Ivan Reitman quickly recognized that this on-the-fly creativity was capturing genuine comedic lightning, so he encouraged the cast to remain flexible. Harold Ramis, though less accustomed to improvised performing, adapted well, and the playful spirit of spontaneity carried throughout the production. 12. John Larroquette Captain Stillman, was new to broad comedy. Trained in more traditional theatrical roles, he wasn't used to the freewheeling comedic environment that Murray and Ramis thrived in. At first, Larroquette found it intimidating. He recalled feeling unsure how to deliver lines that had no exact cadence on the page. But the supportive cast helped him relax, and he soon discovered that playing an inept authority figure could be a comedic goldmine. He borrowed from the obliviousness of classic slapstick characters, blending it with a dash of pompous swagger. By the end, Larroquette reveled in the comedic chaos, and Stripes marked a key stepping stone in his career, paving the way for comedic roles like Dan Fielding in Night Court. 13. Brian Doyle-Murray, Bill's older brother, managed a cameo as one of the recruiting officers. Scheduling conflicts almost kept him away, but a brief window opened, allowing him to appear. The cameo is quick, but if you watch closely, you can spot him in the scene where Winger and Ziski first decide to enlist. This would be one of many sibling collaborations over the years, as Brian frequently popped up in Bill's projects to add a bit of playful familial chemistry. The cameo underscores just how tight-knit the comedic community was at the time. Many of these actors, writers, and directors knew each other through Second City or National Lampoon circles. 14. The cast actually stayed in military barracks. Shooting at Fort Knox meant the crew had access to authentic living quarters. Ivan Reitman decided to lean into that reality and arranged for much of the principal cast to bunk in a setup that resembled boot camp. Bill Murray took full advantage, staging pranks and middle-of-the-night drills that left everyone groggy but laughing. This shared experience built camaraderie fast, so that sense of team spirit you see on film was mirrored off camera. In interviews, cast members like John Candy remembered feeling like they were at a comedic summer camp, forging friendships that would endure for years. 15. Harold Ramis had a tougher time with the physical demands. Unlike Bill Murray, who was a decent athlete and often up for anything, Ramis considered himself more of a writer than a runner. The film required repeated takes of jogging, obstacle courses, and the general rigors of boot camp. In wide shots, you can sometimes see Ramis lagging behind. He joked later that it gave him new respect for actual Army recruits, who endure far more severe training. Despite the sweat and exhaustion, Ramis's willingness to poke fun at himself contributed to the film's laid-back vibe, showing that none of these guys were exactly prime soldier material. 16 P.J. Soul's Stella and Sean Young Louise were initially minor characters, but when test audiences responded positively to their flirtatious rapport with Murray and Ramis, the producers amped up their screen time. The duo brought a welcome change of pace to the testosterone-heavy ensemble, showcasing strong-willed female MPs who could match the guys' wit and energy. Their presence also provided a bit of romance without overwhelming the core comedic vibe. For P.J. Soles, previously known for more dramatic or horror roles like Carrie, and Sean Young on the cusp of Blade Runner, Stripes offered a chance to display lighter comedic chops that would expand their career possibilities. 17. The EM-50 urban assault vehicle was partly inspired by real military prototypes. Ivan Reitman loved the idea of a secret piece of Army hardware that looked like an RV, but carried enough hidden firepower to take on a small platoon. Writers Blum, Goldberg, and Ramis took that concept to a comedic extreme, giving the EM-50 gadget panels, advanced weaponry, and an absurd sense of unstoppable might. The comedic tension of these slacker soldiers suddenly wielding high-tech equipment gave Stripes a whimsical shift into action territory in its final act. While some critics found the pivot jarring, fans generally enjoyed seeing the lovable underdogs wreak havoc in a militarized Winnebago. 18. Filming the razzle-dazzle graduation parade took days of rehearsal. Choreographers aimed to maintain a delicate balance. It had to look somewhat impressive, but still comedic. The idea was that John Winger's ragtag squad had devised an unorthodox routine to flip the Army's serious nature on its head. Hours of practice went into making sure the cast knew their steps, yet they also had to appear amateurish enough to sell the gag. Bill Murray threw in random gestures to keep it unpredictable, and the extras in the scene had to do their best not to crack up when the routine went off the rails. By the time the cameras rolled, the parade had the perfect mix of spirit, sloppiness, and comedic exuberance. 19. One of the biggest backstage debates centered on the film's length and structure. Von Reitman originally envisioned ending Stripes soon after boot camp, focusing more on the comedic hijinks of these unlikely soldiers trying to survive training. But the studio wanted a larger scale second half with an actual mission and more action. The compromise was to have the final act in Europe, featuring the rescue sequence and the EM-50. While many fans love that chunk of absurd action, others feel the transition is abrupt. Despite the unevenness, the sprawling scope gave Stripes an adventurous spirit that set it apart from simpler, single-location comedies of the time. 20. John Candy described the production as summer camp with cameras. Off hours included card games, shared meals, and plenty of late-night laughs. For Candy, who was still establishing himself in Hollywood, forging friendships with Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and Ivan Reitman boosted his confidence. Everyone, actors, crew, and even some visiting soldiers got swept up in that convivial atmosphere. The sense of unity behind the scenes is palpable on screen, giving the movie its intangible warmth. Stripes succeeds in part because you believe these misfits genuinely like each other, no matter how different their personalities might be. 21. Test screenings revealed a divided audience. Some absolutely loved the offbeat humor and breezy irreverence, while others felt that the European rescue storyline veered too far into cartoonish territory. Based on those mixed reactions, Reitman and the producers trimmed certain scenes, toned down some raunchy bits, and tried to tighten the pacing. Nevertheless, they kept a fair amount of edgy material, like brief nudity and body jokes, believing the film's target demographic would appreciate a little rowdiness. The final cut, though not perfect, struck a chord with moviegoers upon release, validating the gamble to stay somewhat edgy in an era where Hollywood comedies were experimenting with new boundaries. 22. Judge Reinhold made his feature film debut in Stripes. Although his role as the timid recruit Elmo was small, it was a pivotal stepping stone. Reinhold was in awe of Bill Murray's improvisational prowess and John Candy's physical comedic genius. The young actor often just watched the pros work, soaking up tips on timing and delivery. Reinhold later credited the experience for teaching him how to think on his feet, a skill that served him well in later hits like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Beverly Hills Cop. Looking back, Stripes gave many emerging talents their first taste of major studio comedy filmmaking. 23. The cast shot most scenes in chronological order. This is a rarity in Hollywood, where productions typically jump around based on logistics, but Ivan Reitman wanted to capture the evolving camaraderie in real time, believing that the actors would naturally start out more awkward, then gradually bond as the story progressed. By the time they filmed the big graduation scene, the performers had genuinely grown close, just like recruits who'd persevered through boot camp together. This strategy paid off in subtle ways. The group's banter and chemistry feel organic, helping sell the idea that they've been side by side through every push-up, drill, and comedic mishap. 24. Bill Murray was in a transitional phase. With Caddyshack behind him and Ghostbusters still on the horizon, Stripes marked an evolution from irreverent sidekick to bona fide leading man. Murray poured his trademark sarcasm and casual irreverence into John Winger, but he also hinted at a deeper side, a guy who's searching for some kind of purpose after a string of failures. This dimension resonated with audiences who recognized that Murray wasn't just the wisecracking funny man. He was capable of shouldering a film's emotional center as well. Stripes helps cement that perception, setting Murray up for a decade of comedic blockbusters and, later, more dramatic fare. 25. The army band in the graduation scene were authentic military musicians. While they had strict protocols about performing, they embraced the chance to appear in a Hollywood movie, even if it was a comedic one. Bill Murray, known for never passing up a chance to amuse, occasionally launched into improvised bits right in front of them, trying to crack their disciplined exterior. A few band members couldn't help but grin, though they tried to maintain the professional bearing they were trained for. These small, real interactions enriched the film's sense of playful rebellion, letting the comedic momentum bounce off real army tradition. 26. Yvonne Reitman fought to keep the film's raunchier elements. Studio executives concerned about alienating mainstream viewers pushed for a more family-friendly tone. Reitman argued that the comedic landscape was changing. Audiences were responding to edgy content from creators like National Lampoon. He believed that an R rating might actually help Stripes stand out, offering older teens and adults a rebellious alternative to safer comedies. Ultimately, the mild nudity and body humor remained, and the film's box office success vindicated Reitman's stance. Stripes proved that pushing comedic boundaries could pay off in a big way, paving the road for other R-rated 80s hits. 27. Harold Ramis recalled Bill Murray sneaking real beer into scenes where the cast were supposed to be drinking soda or a prop beverage. The unwitting reaction shots, actors discovering they were sipping actual beer, added a genuine comedic layer to some group scenes. According to Ramis, Murray just shrugged and claimed it was method acting. It was stunts like this that kept morale high and the cast engaged, even during grueling shoot days. While it occasionally caused minor production headaches, Reitman knew better than to curb Murray's whimsy too much. It was part of the secret sauce that made the comedic chemistry crackle on screen. 28. The iconic phrase, "Lighten up, Francis," was pulled from real overheard soldier talk near Fort Knox. Writers Blum, Goldberg, and Ramis occasionally eavesdropped on local conversations, hoping to capture authentic jargon and banter that they could pepper into the script. When they heard a gruff soldier deliver that line to a buddy, they immediately recognized comedic gold, worked into a scene with Sergeant Hulka calling out an overly intense recruit. It became one of the film's signature quotes. Many fans still repeat it today, especially when they sense someone needs a quick reality check. 29. Financial success was huge. Made for around $10 million, Stripes raked in over $80 million at the box office, a substantial haul in 1981. The film tapped into a desire for a new brand of comedic irreverence, bridging the gap between the rowdy 70s and the upcoming pop flair of the 80s. Stripes also demonstrated the crowd-drawing power of Bill Murray, proving he could drive a comedy to significant box office returns. The success paved the way for Ghostbusters, uniting Murray, Ramis, and Reitman again, and cementing their status as a comedic dream team throughout the decade. 30 cast and crew often cite Stripes as the comedic spark that led directly to Ghostbusters. The camaraderie forged between Murray, Ramis, and Reitman here laid a foundation of mutual trust and a shared sense of comedic language. If Stripes had flopped, the studio might have been less eager to back the oddball concept of paranormal exterminators. But the triumph of a ragtag army comedy gave them the confidence to greenlight what would become one of the biggest comedy blockbusters of all time. Looking back, Harold Ramis often reminisced about Stripes as a wild, youthful experience that felt more like a bunch of friends trying to amuse each other than a big Hollywood production. And that's the untold story behind Stripes. From a near collaboration with Cheech and Chong, to John Candy's mud wrestling antics, to Bill Murray's endless improvisations, the film's tapestry is woven from 1,000 hilarious accidents and last-minute pivots. Part rowdy buddy comedy, part subversive take on military life, and part stepping stone to iconic collaborations. Stripes still resonates because it captures that uniquely 80s blend of sincerity and snark. If you haven't seen it lately, consider enlisting for another watch. Behind each irreverent joke and goofy dance routine lies the real bond of a cast who learned that sometimes all you need is a ragtag bunch of oddballs and a killer punchline to remind you that life's battles are a little easier when you're laughing shoulder to shoulder.